Hello, welcome to Tsaá with Roma. Today I am with Kaveh Akbar, multi-award winning poet. He is the author of Calling a Wolf and Pilgrim Bell, which is coming out with Chatto Windus in January 2022. Welcome to Tsaá with Roma, Kaveh.
It's so good to be here with you, Roma.
It's so nice to be here with you. And I'm both excited and very um nervous because I
No, no,
can't
no, no, no,
wait.
no. You're not allowed to be. No, no, no. You're not allowed to be nervous. I'm such a huge fan of your work, and it's good to get to be here with a peer and a press mate
Yes,
together,
of
which is
course.
incredible.
Yes. The first thing that I want to talk about is I'm quite curious about what kind of hot drink are you drinking right now?
I always have a hot drink here, and I want to hear what you're drinking too. This is actually a cool mug. The birds on it start out as black, like they're just like black silhouettes, and then when you put hot liquid in them, they become like this. Our
Oh,
friend, the poet Amy Nezukumitaro, who's a poet based in Mississippi here, sent us these, and I really like it. But I'm drinking Moringa tea. Usually in the mornings, I'm drinking espresso or americano. We have for our wedding, Paige and I, Paige and I got an espresso machine from a friend, and so consequently, we just have like IV drips of espressos going at all times, but I've been trying to drink more of this moringa tea because it's supposed to be really good for you in like 1,000 different ways. They call it like the miracle tree. I'm sure there are like 500 different trees called the miracle tree, but um, and also it's a way to like keep drinking hot drink that doesn't have caffeine, so that I'm not just constantly mainlining caffeine. So and I really like it. So this is my moringa tea. What are you drinking?
well, first of all, the mug is beautiful, and
Isn't it?
Ivy
Isn't it? I love
Ivy
it.
is a beautiful poet as well. Yes, it's so
Oh, do
cool.
you know Amy? Do you know Amy? Yeah,
Not
yeah, yeah. Amy's an
personally, but
incredible
I
poet. Yeah.
know her
Oh,
because
sure.
I read her.
Sure, of course.
and,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
because
yeah.
she
Amy
has some
Nezukumitaro.
she has some Filipino ancestry as well, and I love.
Right, right. I think one of her parents is Filipino and one of her parents is Indian.
Yes, yes, that's it. And moringa is supposed to be very healthy for you. We have a moringa tree back in the Philippines, like in our backyard. And what we do is we pick the leaves and boil it, and we give it to pregnant women because it's supposed to.
Really? I didn't
Yes,
know this.
it's supposed to increase your immunity,
Oh, that's
especially
incredible.
if you're sensitive.
Oh, it's not near me. But yeah, this has been like I've been drinking so much moringa tea. It's like it just I don't know like what it does. I can't say like, oh, it does this or that, right?
Yeah.
But it just makes me feel a little bit more present in my body, and it makes everything feel like it's like running 3% better.
Yes, it's
Yeah.
much better as well than caffeine.
Yeah,
Than
yeah. Because
caffeine.
again, I drink way too much espresso, so replacing a few cups a day with this moringa tea has been really good for me.
I am drinking turmeric root tea.
Oh, okay. So we both have sort of like anti-inflammatory
Yes,
sort of.
yes, it's very aromatic as well.
Yeah, I love it too. Sometimes when I get I play basketball with my students, and I've made like turmeric poultices sometimes when I get a sprain, because I'm an old man compared to them, and even sometimes we'll be running on the courts against like 18, 19-year-olds, and so relatively speaking, I'm just made of these like rigid old bones that are, so sometimes I'll make like a turmeric poultice afterwards or drink some turmeric tea to help recover from that.
But you know what? It's nice hanging out with 18 and 19 years old because you kind of get their energetic vibe that
Yeah, well, their
friends
energetic
want.
vibe generally involves them sort of running circles around me
Mm.
as we play, and but that's fine.
It seems like you are living an active and healthy lifestyle. So glad to hear that.
I hope so. I hope so. Yeah. Yeah. What do you do? What is your sort of like activity? Do you run? What do you do?
Well, when you said that you were running with 18 to 19 years old, I recently go back to karate because I used to do karate when I was
Wow. You
it's
said when you were 16?
when I was 16, like ages ago. I'm
Wow, wow,
turning
wow, wow.
33, Kaveh. I'm turning 33
No
soon.
way. We're the same age. We're the
Yes,
same age.
are we? Oh my god, see?
Yeah.
Kaveh
Yeah, yeah,
is
yeah. I'm
like,
turning 33 in January.
no way. I'm turning 33 in January. January 20.
January 15th.
Oh my god.
So just
Almost.
within a week. But that means we were born within a week of you. I'm 5 days older than you. So
Or
I still get to be the elder, the big brother.
yeah. Oh, you're an earth dragon like me,
Hmm.
which is But anyway,
How has
let
that
me
been treating you? How has that been treating you thus far?
I don't know, to be honest. Sometimes I don't want to believe in those kind of stuff, but I'm like, whatever.
Yeah.
But I was just gonna say, so I
I
went back to
mean that.
karate, and my sensei
Hmm.
used to go to karate in Lipa, which is my hometown in the Philippines. And because it was
Hmm.
COVID, I asked them if I could do online karate instead of going to an actual gym. And my sensei at that time was a very old man, so he's not doing karate anymore, and he has a grandson who's only 19 years old, and that becomes my sensei.
Wow.
I can get nice energy vibe, very positive. Learn a lot of poetry while doing karate.
Really?
I'm sure it's the same with basketball as well.
I don't
Have you
know.
played
I
some
don't know.
basketball?
Maybe. Yeah. I mean, like people say things like this, but I don't know. I mean, I'm interested to hear you talk about the what you learn about poetry and karate. Because for me, basketball is just like I don't know. Like it's a lot of teamwork and it's a lot of listening and watching, but there's not a ton of correspondence to language. Maybe like at some sort of like elemental level, the sort of energy, the movement, the collaboration, the listening, the watching, these things indelibly inflect the way that
Yes.
I think about language. But it inflects the poetry in the way that like everything that I do inflects poetry. But I don't know that it's super. Sometimes it just feels like the thing that I do that isn't poetry. Like sometimes I need to step, because I talk about poetry all day. I write poems, I teach poems, I'm married to a poet, all my students are poets, most of my friends are poets. So
Right.
sometimes it feels nice to be able to step into basketball, and it's like the one thing in my life that isn't poetry. You know what I mean?
I
But
know
talk to me. I'm
exactly
interested
what
in.
you mean, because
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
what I wanted when I went back to karate. I'm like, I'm gonna have
yeah.
2021 free of poetry, and I'm just gonna go into karate. And then everything I hear is
Yeah.
about poetry. So the other day we were talking about a kata, which is a form of when you watch those Olympians doing a form on their own. So it's like a
Hmm.
choreographed move. So a kata is a type of form, and we're doing this specific
Interesting.
form, and my sensei started talking about every move that you make, you are hitting a note. What note are you trying to hit? That's the question. This is exactly what I'm asking myself when I'm trying to hit a note in poetry, and when I'm trying to
Yeah.
see what kind of form of poetry this specific language should be contained in. So yeah, but that's for another episode of Tsaá with Ro.
No, that's beautiful. That's incredible. I love that. I love the idea of like a certain posture hitting a certain note and trying to. I mean, it makes me think of, choreography and dance, obviously, too, like using the body as the medium.
But before anything else, Kabe, let's put it back. Spotlight your very beautiful Pilgrim Bell. And I'm wondering if you can treat us to a poem first.
Sure, sure. Yeah, absolutely. I'm just glad to be here talking with you. It's very lucky to get to be. I will read a poem called Vines. When I saw God, I trembled like a man. I used the wrong pronouns. God bricked up my mouth hole. His fists were white as gold. There were roaches in my beard. Now I live like a widow. Every day a heave of knitting patterns and sex toys. My family speaks of me with such pride. Nunesh Turakane, they say. His bread is in oil. I thank them for that and for their chromosomes, most of which have been lovely. I am lovely too. My body is hard and choked with juice like a plastic throat stuffed with real grapes. My turn ons include roomy and fake leather. My turn offs have all been ushered into the basement. I'll drink to them and to any victory. Roaches in my beard. Now I live like a window. Fat, wet vines creep through onto my floors, in the pipes and through the walls, gentle as blue flames, they curl my living. There is ice in my attic, sugar on my tile. I am present and useless, like a nose torn from a face and set in a bowl.
Thank you, Kaveh. Thank you. That's so resonant. And you have this just this sense of using language and molding language into that sort of music. It's very lyrical, but also it's very
Mm.
resonant like a prayer. And that's what I discovered in Pilgrim Bell. Pilgrim Bell, you have so many poems there that's actually titled Pilgrim Bell. And
Right, right.
this sort of repetition, like as if it's a song and as if it's a prayer or incantation of some kind of faith. And I guess I really want to ask you, can you talk to us a little bit about the genesis of your second collection, the genesis of Pilgrim Bell?
Sure. Sure. Yeah. Uh, my first book, which you've spoken very kindly about, was largely an addiction recovery narrative. It was my addiction recovery narrative, and it was primarily written during very early sobriety for me. And so a lot of those poems just came very quickly, very raw, very, it was just poetry was a place that I could just kind of put myself, if I was reading or writing a poem, I didn't have to worry about harming myself, right? And so I during those early days, I was just hiding out in poems and writing a lot, right? And then eventually one day I kind of just stacked them together and put out a book. Um and my life was very quiet. I didn't have very many responsibilities at all. I didn't have very many I I mean, that's it. I didn't have very many responsibilities at all. And so those poems became very loud, very super saturated and lots of unpunctuated lines and, very boisterous and bombastic. Um, After writing that collection, my life became quite a bit louder. I was traveling, I started teaching, I got married, all of these are very, very happy, lucky things, right? But they meant that my life got louder, right?
Mm.
And so I began going to poems to sort of seek or create spaces of silence or to use the poem less as, let me just like throw everything at the wall and see what sticks, and more as a kind of contemplative or meditative space
Mm.
um, where maybe even the silence could be the substance of the poem and the language just the kind of negative space poured around it. Um, and trying to teach myself to write poems that way, right? I didn't want to just write calling a wolf too, I wanted to do something very, very different, right? It was easy to write calling a wolf poems, poems that sounded and looked like they could belong there, right? But I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do something different. So, those poems had taught me what they could teach me, and now, I felt like maybe exploring something different. And those titled poems, those poems called Pilgrim Bell, are very interested in that too. Very
Yeah.
interested in silence and how to use silence as an architectural element in a poem.
And it really comes across on your poems and even on the way you present them on the page. I mean, the white spaces and the breaks, there's silence there. What I'm
Hmm.
very interested about is when you talk about silence, writing from that point of silence, like a bell, it's actually reverberating as well. So when that
Hmm.
bell kind of like clangs, even though there's supposed to be
Hmm.
the silence, there's that little reverberations of air. And going back to what you said about, I don't really want to write calling a wolf too, and my life has been boisterous after this first collection. I
Hmm.
read somewhere that you have actually went off social media between your first
Hmm.
poetry book and the second poetry book, and I'm wondering
Hmm.
if there's any relationship with that um, search for silence, and what is the impact of going off social media on your second collection?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that it's super one-to-one, like I did this and then this happened in the work. But certainly, that same thing that I was talking about, where my life began to get very noisy and very loud, and there were just a lot of portals into my consciousness. There was a lot of ways for people to step into my consciousness unbidden, and plant whatever they wanted to plant, or deposit whatever they wanted to deposit, and it just became unhealthy. And so I stepped away, and I found myself, yeah, it was just one way of creating more silence in my life, and limiting, again, the portals of entry to my consciousness, if that makes sense.
Yes. So when we limit these portals of entry and when the noise kind of deadens, did it help you focus more on what you want to write
Yeah, I mean, I think
conversation?
totally. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think that the biggest thing was just like reestablishing my relationship to sort of stillness and silence. I mean, it was a thing where, you know, I couldn't go to the bathroom without my phone, or I couldn't go 5 minutes, sitting still without pulling my phone out of my pocket and checking it. You know what I mean? Like, it just became,
Yes, and I was like that as well. Like I was even
yeah,
just reading a book and like yes, I'm just gonna check my Twitter, check my
yeah,
read the
100%,
book for God's
100%,
sake.
constantly. But same exact thing. Like, to read a book and be
Yeah.
able to read for more than 10 minutes without checking Twitter or email or whatever, and that inability to sort of have a kind of sustained focus, right, was
Mhm.
deeply corrosive to any sort of meditative practice that I might have tried to move towards, right? The inability to, like, sit with myself or with my own thoughts, or bear to, or I mean, like, it's not boredom, but the inability to, like, sit without stimulation. You know what I mean? The
Yeah,
inability to, or the inability to sit without artificial stimulation, because there's always stimulation, there's always something to look at, but
exactly.
the inability to sit without sort of artificial stimulation was just a skill that I had to reacquire.
It sounds like you've reacquired it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's still ongoing. I still have a phone, even if it doesn't have these apps and stuff on it, right? I still have a phone. So it's still ongoing. But yeah, certainly it's better. I mean, my spouse can just, like, lay and read a book for like 6 hours. Like, the cats like Paige so much more than they like me, because, like, they can just sit on Paige for 6 hours in a row, and Paige won't even move. I'm restless, and I have to, after 15 minutes, I have to get up and get some tea, and then I have to go, walk around, la, 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 but
Do you,
um,
I was just really curious. Do you find that you experience that sort of same or similar restlessness when you write a poem?
yeah, actually, the only time in my life when I don't experience that restlessness is, like, when I'm really in the throes of writing. Not in the, like, early stages where I'm, like, trying to get it to start happening. You know what I'm talking about,
Mm.
right? Like, the early stages where nothing's really happening yet, and you're just like, oh my God, is it going to happen today? And you're just sitting there and you're just scratching. But when I'm really in the throes of the thing, when I'm really sort of thinking about nothing else besides the poem, there's some point where something else takes over, and it's not
Yeah,
me or my intelligence or my ego, right?
that's
It's
it.
something else takes the wheel, and then I look up and it's like 3 hours later, and I'm like, oh shit, like I wrote something. You know what I'm saying? Does this
Yeah,
happen to you?
definitely. This is, when I was talking to you about the karate again, this came out
Yeah,
again. Sometimes
really.
you have to let your body move intuitively, which is like
Yeah.
sometimes we just have to let that, I don't know, that's not the thinking mind, that's not the cognitive mind, but we just have
Hmm.
to let that, maybe, I don't know, subconscious mind or our intuition without catching the other thoughts that come and go and come and go. And following on
Yeah.
to that, perhaps going back to calling a wolf, that transition to Pilgrim Bell, because at the moment I'm
Sure.
writing my second collection, and you've done it, and it seems like
Hmm.
you've done it 300 times or 300%, even much stronger than calling a wolf. And I was like, oh my god, this is my Bible. But then when I saw Pilgrim Bell, Pilgrim Bell is my Bible. if you have an advice to someone like me or someone who's working on their second collection who have those thoughts, I don't really want to do
Yeah.
an Antiemetic for Homesickness version 2. I want to show some changes. I want to show that I've improved.
Yeah.
What advice would you give that?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I and the whole world, the whole poetry world, are very excited to hear that you're working on another book. First of all, we're all very, very eager for that. Um, but to say, I don't want to be overly prescriptive because everyone has their own path,
Mhm.
and everyone has things that work for them and don't work for them. And I'm just, a guy, who's done it, but there are a million people who have done this, brilliantly. So, but I'll say that one thing that helped me was I would think about like how I would categorize or how I would think about the sort of like the mood of the poems of the first book, or how I would describe the energy of the poem, and to my mind they were quite frenetic, quite loud, super saturated. They played a lot with momentum and centripetal force and rushes of language, because that's kind of how my brain felt at that time, right? And so I began to think, what is the opposite of that? Again, like I've already learned how to write calling a wolf poems, right? That's what that book was. So like what is the opposite of this? And the opposite of like frenetic, loud, fast poems were sort of quiet, slow poems, right? And so that's how those first like Pilgrim Bell, the title poems came about, with all those periods, the to stop and arrest you over and over again, stop, 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 stop. The opposite of moving fast. I was like, what's the opposite of a line that moves really fast? A line that moves sort of artificially slow, right? And so I put
Mm.
periods everywhere. You've talked beautifully about your correspondence with credit, and I'm someone who just loves a lot of different kinds of art, right? Like I love music, and I love film, and I love dance, and I love, all of these different, I love visual art, and all of these different things. And a question that I have been repeatedly asking myself, when I like, go to a museum, for instance, and I see a sculpture that I really admire, is how do I do this in a poem, right? What would it look like for a poem to do this? Different mediums of art have different strengths and weaknesses, right? Sort of figuring out like when I love a movie, when a moment in a movie makes me laugh or cry or something, think immediately asking like what would it look like to recreate that moment in a poem, right? There's this music video by the singer Janelle Monáe called Cold War, where it's just like a close up of her face singing the song, and in the middle of the song she starts crying, right? Like it's like this sort of weird take where she just starts crying in the middle of singing it. Um I'm obsessed with like what would it look like for a poem to start crying in the middle of it, right? Not, I mean, not for the poet reading the poem to start crying, but for the poem itself on the page to start crying in the middle. These are the sorts of questions that I asked a lot. What would it look like for a poem to do this thing that I am admiring in this piece of art, right? And answering that question again and again um, led to a lot of the poems that are in this new book.
Such a search for what can I do differently, but also how can I use other means of arts or other aspects of arts to help my poetry.
100%. I mean, I'm just looking for, I mean, the poetry is a technology of illumination for me, right? Like it tells me about my living, it tells me what the next right thing for me to do is often, right? And so if I am constantly coming to the poem with new strategies or new ideas, then it will illuminate more and more of the map for me. It'll more and more of the map of my living will be revealed for me. The more, if I just write the same poem over and over again, it's going to stop teaching me about my life.
Felt that as well with Antiemetic from Sickness, that everything is loud, and it was easier for me to write because I knew everything, as in I didn't really do some research, I didn't really look at other pieces
Mm-hmm.
of art, so everything came from within me in a
Sure.
way. But in the second collection, you start to look at the poem. I'm not sure if this happened to you. You start to look at a draft perhaps, and suddenly you start asking, how can I enter this poem through different ways as well?
Yeah, I mean, again, like I feel like the first book for me, and I think maybe this is true for a lot of people. I don't want to say it's true for you, but I think probably this is true for a lot of people, is like the first book was the book that I had to write. The first book was the book that I had like I just had to get it out of me, and I had sort of been waiting all those decades to be able to write that first book. And then the second book was the book that I got to write. The second book was the book that I wanted to write. Now that I had like cleared away the stuff that I had, you know what I'm saying? I don't, does that feel true of you, what you, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Like I've said this part. Maybe I'm not closing the door. Maybe I will shed a light on this narrative at
Hmm.
some point in time, but maybe not through poetry. But now I actually want to write to create something new. Although having said
Right, right.
things, it still seeps true, and I noticed
Of
that as well
course.
with Pilgrim Bell. Um, there's still that narrative of Muslim family, which you've done so beautifully. Your poems about your dad and your brother, the immigrant and the American life. In particular, there's a poem in your poem Ressa's Restaurant, Chicago,
Hmm.
1997, in which the
Hmm.
speaker was only 8 years old, and he was amazed by his dad, um, because the dad was able to look at each person and differentiate whether the person
Yeah,
is an Arab or a Persian or white. And then the speaker asked him,
yeah.
how can you tell that? And the dad said something about, well, it's easy to differentiate because we were just uglier. In the last line, it says, and so being ugly was blessed. I smiled with all my teeth. And I wanted to ask you about those lines. What is ugliness, and how can
Hmm.
we be ugly and still smile?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's such a beautiful and trenchant question. And it's funny, my dad doesn't really read my poems. I mean, he doesn't read them, period. But he came to a reading that I gave in the city where he lives,
Mhm.
and heard me read that poem. And then afterwards, he was like, "I didn't say that." He was like, "I would never say that." Uh, but of
What did
course,
you tell him? Did he know
oh
that?
well, I remember him say, yeah, I remember because I was obsessed with. I was like, "What does that mean? We're just ugly," because I was like a goofy looking kid. I had like giant glasses and
Oh,
terrible teeth, like I was a really goofy looking kid, so I was obsessed with it, because I wanted everyone to think I was like, I was like a kid, I wanted everyone to think I was pretty, and so like to, if we were uglier, that was terrible, so I remember when he said it, I was like
yeah,
obsessed with the fact, and I was like, what the hell does that mean, that sucks, um but I really, I think that it's just the sort of I mean, it's a beauty, right? Like it's not ugliness like just means physically unattractive, right? It's a beauty, but it's like a beauty that's sort of beautiful for having known intense loss or intense grief or intense hardship. There's not a word for it, right? That's why I had to write a poem if there's a word, but it's something like, world weariness or, like beleaguered or, there's something that just feels like beyond its years or and in that poem, I talk about, my dad loved the Rolling Stones and called the
yeah,
Beatles a band for girls,
yeah,
which is to say, like the Beatles were pretty or the Beatles were beautiful to him, the Rolling Stones were ugly, right? The way that he means ugly, the Rolling Stones were, that sort of like
yeah,
brusque, that sort of brashness, and it's sort of macho too, and tied up in masculinity, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, I still think about that a lot. It's funny. My friend Hanif Abdurraqi blurbed the book, and in his blurb, he says something about like this is a book that chooses like ugliness over beauty. The idea of not endeavoring to say ugly things in a pretty way, but just to say the ugly things, right?
mm. And even so, even if it's the ugly things, it's still beautiful somehow.
Yeah, yeah, and it's beautiful in the way that it is true.
Yes.
It's like Keats. beauty is truth and truth is beauty. That is all you should know. It's from the end of Greshner and oh no, not Greshner, but I want to find the actual last stanza. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, Attic shape, fair attitude, with breed of marble men and maidens overwrought, with forest branches and trodden weed, thou, silent form, dost tease us out of thought, as doth eternity. Cold pastoral, and then this is the good part. When old age shall this generation waste, thou shalt remain in midst of other woe than ours, a friend to man, to whom thou sayest, beauty is truth. Truth, beauty, that is all ye know on earth and all ye need to know. Beauty is truth, truth, beauty, that is all ye know on earth and all ye need to know. The idea of like it might not be like beautiful in a kind of ornamental way, but it's beautiful in that it's true, it's rigorous, it's
And that's
it's
all we
bone
need to
hard,
know.
right?
That's all the truth that we need to know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't know that anyone's improved on that since Keats.
Just last year, you have been named poetry editor of the nation. And I'm sure
Hmm.
you are sifting through a lot, maybe thousands of poems. How do you find beauty in those submissions?
Cool question. I've loved working as poetry editor for the Nation. I see it as a really, really lucky opportunity to put some wind at the back of beautiful poems, right? Or true poems or good poems or um and yeah, I mean, I always, the Roman poet Horace said that a poem should dulce et utile, sweet and useful or delight and instruct. I always think of it as like delight and instruct, right? And delight, is tied up in this idea of beauty that we're talking about, right? Like it should be but I don't necessarily think that that means that it needs to be beautiful in this sort of ornamental way or beautiful in this sort of, but beautiful in that it illuminates something about an unprecedented experience of being alive on the planet Earth, or it illuminates something about language, or it surprises, right? I think about surprise as a synonym for delight. That we all sort of understand the idea of poetry as something that's supposed to instruct, but I think a lot of the times I feel myself sort of galloping towards instruction and leaving the light in the dust. Like I'm like, I gotta tell this thing, I gotta tell this important thing, and then I forget that in order to get the reader to listen to it or care about it, there has to be some measure of delight or surprise or illumination or complication, right? What I'm interested in is something that feels very new or very surprising, right?
Yes.
And you can tell that the poet is trying to learn something, right? Not that the poet is trying to teach something, but the poet is trying to learn something for themselves.
Yes. Yeah, that's the difference. In some poems, you just read some poems and they're very loud and they're very like, instructing as well. But there's also
Yeah,
a different kind of instructing in which not only the reader discovers something, but also the speaker themselves discovers something.
yeah,
Yeah.
100%,
Right.
100%.
Kaveh, it's been so lovely to speak with you.
Yeah, it's so good to catch up with you. And Shah, when I come back to the UK, whenever the next time I'm able to come there is, when it's safe to do so, I'd love to meet up and maybe we can read together again or
Yes,
get some tea.
please. Yes, please get some like realty that we can share together. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Real tea that we can pour out of the same pot.
Before we say goodbye to our audience for now, would you mind treating us to another poem?
Sure, yeah. I'd be happy to. And thank you so much for this, Roma. I
Yes,
mean,
thank
that's so
you.
lucky
For
uh and I'm thrilled to hear that you're working on a second collection. That's exciting
oh,
for
don't
me
count on
and
me
for
yet.
I think everyone. No, I mean, whenever it comes out,
Maybe
no
my
one is
turn.
no, absolutely, as well you should. No one should be rushing you and you shouldn't be rushing you, but just knowing that at some point in the future it will exist is an occasion for gratitude.
Yes, got it.
Um and so, yeah. Okay, I'll read one of the Pilgrim Bell poems. Um, yeah, there's 6 poems in the book called Pilgrim Bell, and this is one of them. How long can you speak without inhaling? How long can you inhale without bursting apart? History is wagging its ass at us, twirling in its silver cape. I want to kiss your gloves. I want you to kiss my friends. Can you see the wet azalea quivering on its vine? Its ripening dread? If it never rained again, I would still wear my coat, still wrap my socks in plastic, doing one thing is a way of not doing everything else. Today I answer only to my war name, wise salt. I can make a stone float off into the sky. I can make a whole family disappear. I know so many people have been awful to you. I've given each one a number. When you're ready, I will ask you to draw me their hands.
Thank you so much. How
Thank
long
you so
can
much,
we
Roma.
inhale without bursting apart? And well, you know what? Sometimes we just need to answer to our war names, isn't it? You can really feel the
100%.
softness. Is this the one with a lot of period on it in it?
Hmm.
You can
Hmm.
really feel it. You're
Yeah,
more
each of those
powerful
pauses.
when you
Yeah, yeah, I hope so. I hope so. Again, I'm really interested in silence as the sort of substance of the poem and language, just the sort of shape around it.
yes, definitely. And that's those
Yeah,
silences make even the language, what's there, actually be visible because of the spaces around it. Thank you so much,
yeah,
Kaveh.
that's the hope. Yeah, thank you so much.